Democracy is a fundamental of most world governments, specifically these ones. But what is the origin of democracy? How far back can we really look for our modern principles of governance? The answer? To find that, we look back to classical Athens, which is often described as the birthplace of democracy. It's the year 508 BCE, and Athens is on the brink of something radical. The current ruler of Athens, Isagoras, is a puppet of Sparta, and the demos, the people, of Athens want change. A local leader of the people and head of the pro-democracy Alcmaeonid clan, Cleisthenes, has been exiled by the tyrannical Isagoras. This triggered a revolution against Isagoras. Needless to say, Isagoras was ousted from his position of absolute power, but remained a political figure. With the downfall of Isagoras, Cleisthenes returned to Athens and assumed a position of power. In order to quell the anger of the populace, Cleisthenes promised to instate a direct democracy. After the tyranny had been overthrown, Isagoras, who had been a friend of the tyrants, and Cleisthenes were political rivals. As Cleisthenes was getting the worst of it, political backlash, from his Hetairae, political group, he brought the people over to his side by promising to hand the state over to the populace. Athenian direct democracy had been born. So, how does this ancient democracy compare to our modern ones? First, the similarities. Much like any modern democracy, Athenian democracy was not perfect. It had several flaws that contemporaries in ancient Greece could see. One of these issues was patronage. Patronage was a system of sponsorship. A rich man, it was always a man as women had very little power in antiquity, would pay for the education or service of someone from a lower social rank. In return, this person would have essentially had a special bond with their patron that came with certain obligations. In the very early days of Athenian democracy, politicians worked within this system. The Athenians knew it was an issue, and so, in 462 BCE, banned patrons from sponsoring those who served within the ecclesia, the public assembly, and instated a primitive form of welfare for the poorest of Athens' citizens. This was meant to free political debate from the influence of rich patrons who would have likely used their power over the poor voters to return Athens to oligarchy with them at its head. In Athenian thinking, political thinking came prior to financial independence. When compared to similar modern-day practices, patronage essentially becomes what we call election fraud. The patron would control the political actions of the voter, which did not often reflect their true political beliefs. The instating of financial assistance for the poor, something we still do in modern democracy, is a good point of comparison between our society's methods of democracy. And now, the differences between modern and ancient democracy. Athenian democracy had significant differences to most modern Western democracies. Foremost among these differences were two things. First, Athens was a slave society in which the enslaved underclass had no political voice beyond their patron or master. Slaves, not citizens, needed the protection of a patron and were beholden to their kurioi for their rights. The free man's person was protected by the democracy and did not require an elite sponsor. As can be seen by this quote, ancient democracies, despite being a rule by the people, did not include all their people in that ruling. By contrast, modern democracies aim to give all who live under them self-determination and a voice in the discussion of their lives. The second difference, women were denied a political voice. This was an era of rampant misogyny and subjugation of women, a time before ideas of all humans having equal rights was even considered, and often women were not viewed as full people. In antiquity, there was a much smaller percentage, perhaps only about 15%, of the total population entitled so to participate in politics, namely, adult citizen men, born of an Athenian mother and father. The restrictions on eligibility excluded two main groups in particular, women and foreigners, including slaves. Whilst we may struggle with gender equality today, at least modern democracy considers women to be human. So, to conclude, in comparing ancient Athenian democracy to modern democracy, we can see that in some regards it was similar to our modern system. But there are major differences between the two. Modern democracy spawned out of the principles of the Enlightenment, and as such has some major ideological qualms with its ancient counterpart, mostly in terms of the equality of gender and social status. Overall, when we look back to the ancient past for our democratic heritage, we may not find a satisfying through line from the past to the present. Whilst the ancient democracy in Athens was revolutionary, it wasn't the same as what we have in the modern day.